Our next and final speaker, unless Congressman Frank is able to stop by, is Hilary Shelton, who presently serves as the director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau, which is the federal policy division of the over 500,000 member National Civil Rights Organization. Prior to coming to NAACP, he worked on federal policy for the United Negro College Fund and earlier for the United Methodist Church's General Board of Church and Society. Larry?
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. Let me just first thank our good friends, the Congressman Bobby Scott and Barney Frank. And we've heard from Bobby Scott this morning, and my guess is Barney Frank is probably trying to make his way over to spend some time with us as well. Their commitment to this issue is one that we find very refreshing and we support very strongly. Can you hear me in the back okay? Very good. As you can imagine, the NAACP will be strongly opposed to a provision like this that prohibits those who are dependent on financial aid from getting access to those resources. Indeed, we find this very classist and, quite frankly, it's a very racist policy. If you look at who's actually affected by these policies, you'll find it's only America's poor, those who are poor enough to be able to be eligible for financial aid under normal circumstances, which also happens to be disproportionately people of color. As you know, over almost 80% of African Americans are dependent on financial aid of one sort or another. And so indeed, it's only those who are dependent on financial aid that will be affected by this. Our position is very clear and very short and sweet. That is to say, anyone that is out of prison, they can very well pass the test to be able to become eligible to go to a college or university. If they've made a mistake, like experimented with drugs in the past, they paid their debt to society to a point they're back out on America's streets, indeed, they should be given the opportunity to get a college education if they possibly can. We know this. We know that those Americans that are able to get college educations are much less likely to get in trouble again, which means we cut recidivism rates significantly. We also know that very well that policies like this are put in place that affect those who are poor in our society, poor white Americans, African Americans, Native Americans, whatever the case might very well be, but those again who are disproportionately dependent on financial aid. We also know that a college education has become extremely expensive these days, and that very well indeed, even the financial aid that is available to most Americans is not adequate. To cut into programs like that is unfathomable, I think, for most people of conscience. So very well, we move to eliminate these provisions very strongly, and I'll leave you on this note. That indeed, I seem to remember a very, very well-known group of college students, a couple of college students from a very wealthy and a very affluent family in this country. That very well got in trouble for drug use, and indeed, because they paid their debt, they were able to go back to school, but they were never dependent on financial aid, so they didn't have to experience the double jeopardy that we see very well now as part of this particular financial aid package. And for those of you who still didn't catch on to what I'm talking about, it's the Bush girls. They did just fine after they were able to go back. They indeed had a little problem they had to address, which was their use of drugs and alcohol. You know, alcohol is not illegal for them. Well, I guess it was at that age. Initially, wasn't it? But indeed, they spent no time in prison. They were able to continue going to college. And because their parents were wealthy enough to be able to continue to pay their tuition, their college education was not interrupted one bit. Indeed, we want that for all Americans as well. A question was asked once as I close out and look forward to your questions. The question was asked of my predecessor, Clarence Mitchell, who was the first director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau. And those who don't know, he was brother to Perrin Mitchell, the first African-American elected to the U.S. Congress from Baltimore. And indeed, when he went before Harvard University students, they asked him, what indeed does the African-American community want? As he moved to help pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and was looking at the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And he paused for just a moment and said, we want what everybody else has. So indeed, as we talk about these issues of access to college, to access to a higher education, indeed, all we're saying is we want to strike these very discriminatory provisions because we believe that African Americans and poor Americans deserve what everybody else has, and that is an opportunity to be able to get a good college education. Thank you.